The sound started in the marrow of his bones before it ever reached his throat. Samuel Blackwood, or what remained of him, stood on the ridge overlooking the Ozark Valley as corruption spread through the October mist like ink through water. Below, in the parking lot of Miller's Gas and Grocery, 5 shadows moved wrong. They walked backward while appearing to move forward, their edges bleeding darkness that ate the sodium lamplight. Inside the store he could feel them, 7 human heartbeats, rapid and rabbit-quick, with fear they didn't yet understand. The shadows were hunting, and they'd already marked their prey. Sam's massive form, 6 feet at the shoulder, coal-black fur that drank moonlight, eyes burning sulfur yellow, tensed as ancient instinct warred with the fragile thread of humanity he'd clung to for 73 years. The howl built inside him, not sound but force, not voice but power that could shatter the boundary between worlds. It rose from the hell he'd escaped, from the curse he'd accepted, from every soul he'd failed to save and every one he'd succeeded in protecting. When he finally released it, the earth itself stopped. Birds froze mid-flight. The wind died. The shadows writhed, pinned like insects to the fabric of reality, by a sound that existed in frequencies the living couldn't fully hear but felt in their deepest cells, a resonance of judgment, of ancient bargains, of a guardian who wore damnation like armor. For 3 eternal seconds, everything in a half-mile radius stood absolutely still. Then Sam charged down the hillside, and hell followed him like a cape, because some monsters became monsters to fight worse things, and tonight, in this forgotten corner of Missouri, that was the only salvation anyone would get. If you connect with my story, please press the like button to find some light in this priest's heart. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next life stories, and tell me about them in the comments where you are watching this video and what time it is right now. It makes me very happy to know that from any corner of the country or the world you are listening to me. The thing about becoming a hellhound is that nobody tells you how much you'll still feel human. Sam Blackwood had been dead for 73 years, but he remembered everything about being alive. The weight of his daughter's hand in his, the smell of his wife's perfume, the specific creak of the 3rd step on their farmhouse stairs. He remembered dying, too. The mine collapse of 1952 that took 37 men and left their families with empty caskets and company checks that wouldn't cover a month's rent. He remembered the choice offered in that crushing darkness: stay dead and pass on, or accept the curse and remain, guard the border between worlds, become the thing that stands in the gap when evil comes calling. He'd said yes because his daughter Sarah was only 8, because someone needed to watch over the valleys and hills where good people tried to build lives, because maybe, just maybe, he could turn damnation into purpose. That was 7 decades ago. The original Sarah had lived a full life, passed on peacefully in 2019 at 77 years old, surrounded by children and grandchildren who thought their family guardian was just folklore. But her great-great-granddaughter, also named Sarah and also 8 years old, now lived in the same Ozark region Sam still prowled. The border between worlds ran through Missouri like a scar, and things kept trying to cross over. Things like the shadows now circling Miller's Gas and Grocery, hunting for the fear they fed on, growing stronger with every scream they'd eventually harvest. The Ozarks in October wore death beautifully. Sam moved through forests where maple and oak burned crimson and gold, where morning fog clung to hollows like the breath of sleeping gods, where limestone bluffs jutted from hillsides like broken teeth. This was the Missouri the tourists never saw, too remote, too poor, too strange. The small towns scattered through these hills had names like Peculiar, Tightwad, and Knoblick, places where everyone knew everyone else's business and newcomers were marked for generations. Miller's Gas and Grocery sat at a crossroads where Highway 19 met County Road J, one of those intersections that existed more in the spirit world than the physical one. Sam had been watching it for 3 days, ever since the first anomaly appeared, a cold spot that persisted even in direct sunlight, a place where electronics died and compasses spun wildly. He'd known something was building. The veil between worlds thinned in certain places, and this crossroads was one of them. What he hadn't expected was the speed. The shadows had manifested in minutes, not hours. Someone had called them here, intentionally weakened the barrier. That meant a summoner, a human playing with forces they couldn't possibly understand. It meant the situation was worse than he'd thought. Sam's paws made no sound as he descended the ridge, moving with the fluid grace of something that was never quite solid, never quite there. His form existed in a state between states, physical enough to interact with the world, spectral enough to pass through it when needed. The shadows in the parking lot weren't like him. They were pure malevolence, fragments of something older and hungrier that had been fragmented eons ago and scattered across dimensions. Individually, they were dangerous. Together, they could create a feeding frenzy that would drain the life from everyone in the store and leave 7 corpses with smiles on their faces, dead from the most exquisite terror their minds could manufacture. He could see them more clearly now as he approached. They wore rough approximations of human shape, 2 arms, 2 legs, a head, but the proportions were all wrong. Too many joints in the limbs, heads that rotated further than necks should allow. They moved in perfect synchronization, a hunting pack with shared consciousness. The parking lot had 3 vehicles, a rust-eaten pickup truck that probably belonged to Earl Miller, who'd owned the store for 40 years, a Honda Civic with Colorado plates and bumper stickers for national parks, and a battered Jeep Cherokee with mud splattered to the windows. Through the store's grimy windows, Sam could make out figures inside. Maya Rodriguez pressed herself against the far wall, her phone held up like a talisman as she tried to film what her eyes were telling her couldn't be real. At 28, she'd investigated 73 allegedly haunted locations across America, debunked 69 of them, and genuinely documented 4. This would be her 5th if she survived. Beside her, 17-year-old Danny Chen gripped a mop handle like a baseball bat, his lean frame vibrating with adrenaline as he positioned himself between the threat and the elderly woman behind him. Ruth Abernathy, 71 years old and sharp as the knives she'd sharpened for 5 decades as the town's butcher, stood with her hands folded calmly at her waist. She'd seen shadows before. She'd been there in 1963 when the last major incursion happened, when something had tried to breach the veil, and Samuel Blackwood's Howl had saved her life. She'd been 18 then, working the late shift at her father's shop. She recognized the signature in the air, the specific quality of wrongness that preceded his arrival. Marcus Webb, the county sheriff at 42 years old and cynical about most things, after 20 years in law enforcement, stood frozen by the cash register, with his hand on his holstered weapon. His rational mind fought desperately against what his eyes reported, that the shadows outside weren't cast by anything, that they moved independently, that they were somehow both flat and dimensional simultaneously. Earl Miller, 63 and diabetic, had his medical alert pendant clutched in one shaking hand, while his other reached for the shotgun he kept under the counter. The 7th person in the store was the reason the shadows had come. Tobias Crane stood near the coolers in the back, a leather satchel at his feet, his lips moving in a whisper that Sam could hear even from outside. The summoning wasn't complete yet. The shadows were just scouts testing the barrier. Whatever Crane was calling would be much worse. Sam hit the parking lot at full speed. The shadows turned in unison, and for a moment they considered him. In the hierarchy of supernatural threats, a hellhound registered somewhere between annoyance and actual danger. These particular shadows decided on annoyance. They spread out, encircling him with movements that defied physics, sliding backward while lunging forward, appearing in one spot and being in another, without crossing the space between. The first one struck from above, dropping through the air itself, like it was diving through water. Sam's jaws caught it mid-descent, his teeth, each one forged in the same fires that had claimed his humanity, shearing through its pseudo-physical form. The shadow shrieked, a sound like metal scraping bone, and dissolved into smoke that tasted of ashes and despair. The remaining 4 rushed him simultaneously. This was where the curse earned its price. Sam's body shifted, no longer entirely canine, no longer entirely anything. His form became smoke and shadow, but burning, lit from within by the same sulphur-yellow light that burned in his eyes. He was Hell's answer to Hell's creatures, fire to fight fire, darkness shaped into protection instead of destruction. He moved through their attacks like wind through a fence, reforming behind them, his howl building again. This time, when he released it, The sound didn't freeze. It shattered. The nearest shadow exploded into fragments that evaporated before touching ground. Another tried to flee, sliding across the pavement toward the tree line, but Sam's paw came down on it with the weight of damnation. The concrete cracked, the shadow screamed, and died. The last two circled warily now, reassessing. Inside the store, everyone had dropped to the floor, hands over ears as the howl resonated through their bones. But Tobias Crane kept chanting. His voice rose over the chaos, Latin words that predated the Roman Empire, a summoning in a tongue that hurt to hear. The temperature dropped 15 degrees in as many seconds. Frost crawled across the store windows in patterns that resembled screaming faces. Sam felt it before he saw it, the main incursion point forming, reality tearing like wet paper. In the forest beyond the parking lot, between two ancient oaks that had stood for 300 years, the air split open. What came through made the shadows look like pets. It stood 12 feet tall, vaguely humanoid but covered in mouths. Hundreds of them, each with too many teeth, each whispering different promises of pain. Its eyes, all 7 of them arranged in a spiral across what might have been a face, fixed on the store. On the people inside. On the feast Tobias Crane had promised it. The remaining 2 shadows fled, dissolving into mist and retreating to whatever hell had spawned them. They wanted no part of what was coming. Sam stood between the entity and the store, and for the first time in 73 years, he felt genuinely afraid. This thing wasn't from the usual catalogue of horrors that tested the veil. This was old, from the time before time, from the spaces between spaces where the universe hadn't quite finished forming. The mouths kept whispering, each one speaking directly into his mind. Guardian, gatekeeper, pretender. You wear their curse like armor, but we know what you are. Human, weak, temporary. Step aside, and we will make your ending quick. Stand against us, and we will show you eternities of suffering that make your current damnation seem like mercy. Sam's answer was to plant his paws and bare his teeth. The entity laughed, a sound like continents grinding together, and raised one arm. The arm split open, unfurling into tentacles lined with bone spurs and dripping something that burned holes in the pavement. Inside the store, Ruth Abernathy stood and walked calmly to the door. Maya grabbed for her, shouted something about staying down, but Ruth just patted her hand gently and kept moving. She pushed the door open and stepped into the parking lot, her sensible orthopedic shoes crunching on broken glass from a window one of the shadows had cracked. The October wind caught her grey hair and she looked at the entity without flinching. Then she looked at Sam, and her eyes held recognition. "Hello, Samuel," she said quietly. "Been a while since 63. You look exactly the same. Still ugly as sin, but I suppose that's the point." The entity's attention shifted to her, curious. Here was a human with no fear, no delicious terror to feed on. Its mouths frowned in unison. "You know this creature?" it asked, its voice coming from everywhere and nowhere. "You address it by name?" Ruth smiled, the same calm smile she'd worn while teaching her grandchildren to fish, while attending her husband's funeral, while facing down every hardship 71 years of Ozark living had thrown at her. "I know him. He saved my life when I was younger than that boy in there." She nodded toward Danny, still visible through the window, frozen with indecision. "Samuel Blackwood died in the mine collapse of 52 and made a deal to stay, to protect us, to stand in gaps like this when things like you come calling." She took another step forward, placing herself between Sam and the entity. "And I'm telling you, creature, that you picked the wrong crossroads. This is his territory. These are his people, and you're not welcome here." The entity considered this. Then one of its mouths opened wide, impossibly wide, and spoke directly to Ruth. "Brave, foolish. We appreciate the seasoning fear adds to a meal, but defiance has its own flavor. We accept your offering." The tentacle arm lashed out with speed that shouldn't have been possible for something that size. It would have taken Ruth's head off cleanly. Sam was faster. He materialized between them, solid now, fully physical, taking the impact across his shoulder. The bone spurs drove deep, finding purchase in the spectral flesh that was neither living nor dead, but something in between. Pain exploded through him, real pain, not the phantom echoes of sensation he usually felt. The entity's touch carried venom, corruption, something designed to unmake the fabric of supernatural existence. His howl this time was agony-given voice, but it gave Ruth time to scramble back, and it gave Marcus Webb time to finally overcome his paralysis. The sheriff burst through the store door with his service weapon drawn, firing 3-shot center mass at the entity. The bullets passed through it like it was smoke, ricocheted off the pavement, and embedded themselves in Earl Miller's truck. Marcus cursed, racked another round, and kept firing anyway because his training said, you engaged the threat, and his mind had finally caught up to the reality that the threat was very, very real. Danny Chen followed him out, mop handle raised, his young face set with the kind of determination that came from video games and movies, and absolutely no understanding of what he was actually facing. Maya Rodriguez came last, her phone still recording, her other hand holding a small silver crucifix she'd bought at a gas station in Kansas because you never knew. Inside, Tobias Crane's chanting reached a crescendo. His nose bled freely now, the price of the summoning painting his lips red. The entity turned from Sam, suddenly focused on its summoner. The bargain is not yet fulfilled, it said, all its mouths speaking in perfect unison. You offered us 7 souls. We count 7, yes, but 1 is tainted. 1 wears the mark of our enemy. The price must be adjusted. Crane's eyes widened. Whatever he'd expected, this wasn't it. He stammered something about the agreed terms, about his family's grimoire specifying the requirements, about how his great-great-grandfather had successfully completed this exact ritual in 1889. The entity's laughter shook the remaining windows in their frames. Successful? Child, your ancestor opened a door and we took what we wanted. The fact that he survived was coincidence, not contract. We owe you nothing. We take what we please. And what pleases us now is to consume the Guardian first, to feast on suffering that has marinated for 73 years, to crack open the cage of his curse and drink the humanity still preserved inside like wine from a broken bottle. Then we will take the others. And then, Summoner, we will take you. The tentacle withdrew from Sam's shoulder with a wet, sucking sound. Black blood, if it could be called blood, poured from the wound, steaming as it hit the ground. Sam's vision blurred, doubled, tripled. He could feel the venom spreading, trying to unravel the bindings that kept his existence stable. The curse that made him a hellhound was a precise thing, a contract with specific terms, and this entity's poison was designed to corrupt those terms. If it succeeded, he wouldn't die. He'd become something worse, mindless, hungry. Everything he'd spent 7 decades fighting against. He tried to howl again, but his throat produced only a wet, rattling gasp. Ruth knelt beside him, her weathered hands finding the ruff of his neck, burying themselves in fur that burned with cold fire. "Don't you dare," she whispered. "Don't you dare let go now, Samuel Blackwood. Your Sarah needs you, the new Sarah. 8 years old and living in your old house, did you know that? Her parents bought it 5 years ago, fixed it up. She plays in the same yard where you taught the first Sarah to ride a bike. She's got your eyes, Samuel. Same brown eyes, same stubborn set to her jaw. And she believes in you. Tells the other kids at school about the ghost dog that protects the hills. They laugh at her. But she knows. Somehow, she knows." The words cut through the venom's fog. Sarah. The name that had defined his purpose for 7 decades. Sam's eyes focused on Ruth, and something in them made her smile sadly. "That's right. Fight it. You've got too much left to do to fall apart now." She looked up at Marcus, who'd stopped firing and was staring at his bullets doing nothing. "Sheriff, I need you to trust me on something crazy." Marcus made a sound that might have been a laugh, or might have been a sob. "Lady, we passed crazy about 5 minutes ago. What do you need?" "That shotgun Earl keeps under the counter. It's loaded with rock salt and iron filings. His grandmother was from the old country. Taught him the proper way to load shells for things that go bump in the night. Get it. Aim for the center mass, where all those mouths cluster. It won't kill this thing, but it'll hurt enough to get its attention." Marcus stared at her for 1 long second, then turned and ran back into the store. The entity watched him go with amusement. Mortal weapons. How delightful. This is why we savor your species. Such hope in the face of inevitable consumption. Maya stepped forward, her crucifix held high. The entity looked at it and several mouths smiled. Silver pressed into the shape of torment. Do you think we fear the symbols of your God, little recorder of truths? But when she spoke, her voice was steady. No, I think you're full of shit. I've investigated 73 hauntings. Most were fraud, a few were real, and the real ones? They all had one thing in common. They fed on fear. They needed us to believe they were unstoppable. The moment we stopped being afraid, they started getting weaker. She took another step forward. You're big, you're scary. You've got a great villain monologue, but you're stuck halfway through whatever door Crane opened. You can't fully manifest. That's why you need the souls, isn't it? To anchor yourself completely in our reality. The entity's amusement vanished. Several mouths hissed at her. Clever ape. And what do you imagine your cleverness earns you? A slower death? We can arrange that. But Sam saw it now, what Maya had spotted. The entity's lower half was still translucent, still caught in the tear between worlds. It could reach through, could strike and grab, but it couldn't fully enter. The summoning had been interrupted when Sam destroyed the scouts. Tobias Crane's chanting had stopped when his confidence shattered. The door was stuck half open. Marcus emerged from the store carrying Earl's shotgun, the old man right behind him with a hunting rifle that looked like it belonged in a museum. Danny Chen had found a toolbox somewhere and armed himself with a tire iron. They formed a ragged line in front of Sam and Ruth, 5 humans and 1 cursed guardian facing down something that had eaten civilizations. The entity spread its tentacle arms wide, mouths laughing. This is why we love your world. Such theater, such inevitable tragedy. Come then, defenders. Show us your defiance, give us your fear, feed us your... Sam stood. The movement cost him everything he had left, pain shrieking through every fiber of his existence. But he stood. His shoulder was a ruin of torn spectral flesh and spreading corruption. His breathing rattled. His vision kept trying to fade to black. But he stood between the entity and the humans, and when he spoke, his voice came out as a low growl that held echoes of the man he'd once been. No. The word hung in the October air. The entity's mouths fell silent. Sam took one step forward, then another. Each movement was agony. Each breath was a victory. You want to know what 73 years of damnation teaches you? Endurance. You want to know what being a guardian means? It means you don't stop. You don't fall. You don't give up. Not when there are people behind you who deserve better than becoming your meal. His form started to shift, the hellhound shape becoming less stable, smoke and shadow and sulfur yellow light bleeding through. You're right about one thing. I am human, was human, still carry it inside me like a disease, like a weakness. He took another step and the parking lot concrete cracked beneath his paws. But here's what you don't understand. That humanity, that weakness, it's also the strongest thing in this whole damned existence. It's what makes a 34-year-old miner say yes to eternal damnation if it means his daughter grows up safe. It's what makes a 71-year-old woman step between a monster and a hellhound because she remembers a kindness from 60 years ago. It's what makes a sheriff fire useless bullets because protecting people is what he swore to do. It's what makes kids with mop handles and tire irons stand their ground when they should run. The venom was winning. Sam could feel himself coming apart, the careful balance of his curse unraveling. He had minutes at most, but he used those minutes to keep walking forward, to keep moving toward the entity, to position himself directly in front of the tear between worlds. So, here's my counteroffer, creature. You want a feast? You want suffering that's been marinating for 73 years? Come get it. But you're going to have to come all the way through. You're going to have to commit. And when you do, when you're fully manifested in our reality instead of half-assed straddling 2 worlds, I'm going to show you what happens when you threaten my territory. The entity considered this. Then it reached back through the tear, gripped the edges of reality itself and pulled. The sound was like the universe screaming. The tear widened. The entity's lower half began to solidify, become physical, anchor itself in the parking lot of Miller's Gas and Grocery. It smiled with every mouth. "I accepted, Guardian, let us dance." Sam's howl started deep in whatever served as his soul. It built like a wave, like an avalanche, like every scream of every person he'd saved over 73 years given voice simultaneously. It was rage and love and sacrifice and spite. It was a father's fury at threats to his child. It was a guardian's roar at invasion of his territory. It was a damned soul's middle finger to the forces that thought damnation meant defeat. The sound hit the entity at the same moment it finished materializing, at the exact instant when it became fully physical and therefore fully vulnerable. The entity staggered. Mouths shrieked in pain and surprise. The howl wasn't just sound. It was essence, the concentrated fury of everything Sam had become weaponized and directed with surgical precision. It hit the creature's semi-stable form like a hammer hits glass, and cracks appeared. Actual visible cracks running through its body, like lightning through storm clouds. Behind Sam, Marcus and Earl opened fire. The shotgun loaded with rock salt and iron filings, the hunting rifle with blessed ammunition Earl's late wife had prepared decades ago for exactly this kind of emergency. The rounds struck true, tearing into spectral flesh now solid enough to damage. The entity roared, all its mouths screaming different pitches that harmonized into something close to music, close to madness. Maya rushed forward with her crucifix, not as a weapon, but as a focus. She'd studied enough to know that faith without action was worthless, but action directed by genuine belief could channel power. She pressed the silver cross to the ground where the tear opened, and spoke in Latin she'd learned from an ex-priest in New Mexico, who'd seen things that made him quit the church, but not the faith. "By earth and water, by fire and air, by all that is holy and all that is true, I bind thee to this moment, this place, this reckoning." The tear shuddered, started to close. Tobias Crane screamed from inside the store. "No! You're ruining everything!" Decades of preparation, generations of my family's work. He ran out clutching his leather satchel, pulling from it a curved knife that looked like it was made from obsidian, or maybe from something darker. "The entity stays. It must stay. I was promised power, immortality, knowledge of the spaces between." He lunged not at the entity, but at Maya, the knife aimed at her throat. If he could spill her blood on the tear, it might disrupt her binding, might keep the door open long enough for the entity to recover. Danny Chen hit him with the tire iron. The impact wasn't sophisticated, pure teenage reflexes and adrenaline. The iron caught Crane across the shoulders and sent him sprawling. The obsidian knife skittered across the pavement. Ruth Abernathy calmly walked over and stepped on it, her orthopedic shoe pinning it in place. "Young man," she said to Crane, who was trying to get up, blood running from his split lip, "I've been butchering meat since before your parents were born. I know exactly how to hurt someone efficiently. Stay down." The entity was falling apart. Sam's howl had done more damage than he'd hoped, and the sustained gunfire was preventing it from regenerating. But the venom was winning too. Sam could feel himself dissolving, the boundaries that defined his existence blurring. He had seconds left before he ceased to be anything resembling the guardian he'd been for 73 years. But seconds was enough. He gathered everything remaining, every scrap of will, every fragment of the man he'd been, every moment of love for his daughter, both daughters, all the Sarahs across the decades, every protective instinct he'd honed into a weapon, and he charged. His physical form was mostly gone now. He was smoke and fire and will, held together by nothing but spite and purpose. He hit the entity like a comet, drove through its center mass, and kept going, kept pushing it back toward the tear, back toward the space between worlds it had crawled from. The entity thrashed, tentacles wrapping around him, mouths biting, trying to consume him, even as he consumed it with hellfire that burned from the inside out. They went through the tear together, guardian and horror locked in an embrace that was part battle, part mutual destruction. Behind them, the tear started closing faster, reality reasserting itself, the universe deciding that this particular wound had stayed open too long. Ruth saw what was happening. "No!" She ran forward, but Marcus caught her, held her back. "Let me go. He'll be trapped on the other side." The sheriff held tight, his face grim. "Ma'am, I think that's the point." They watched through the shrinking tear as Sam and the entity tumbled through impossible spaces, places where geometry was a suggestion and physics was a joke. They saw the entity finally tear apart completely, fragmenting into pieces that scattered across dimensions. They saw Sam's form, what remained of it, start to stabilize, start to pull back together, but too slowly. The tear was closing faster than he could return. For just a moment, before the tear sealed completely, Sam's face appeared in the gap. Not the hellhound, but the man. 34 years old, dirty from the mines, smiling the way he'd smiled at his daughter before heading to work on his last morning. His lips moved, forming words. "Tell Sarah I love her, all of them, every Sarah, watch over them." Then the tear closed with a sound like a sigh, and Samuel Blackwood was gone. The parking lot of Miller's Gas and Grocery fell silent, except for the October wind and someone crying. Maya stood with her crucifix still pressed to the ground where the tear had been, tears running down her face. Danny sat on the pavement, tire iron across his knees, shaking from adrenaline crash. Marcus still held Ruth, who'd stopped struggling, and just stood there looking at the empty space where a guardian had made his last stand. Earl Miller leaned against his truck, shotgun dangling from one hand, his other hand pressed to his chest as he tried to remember how to breathe normally. Tobias Crane lay unconscious where Danny had hit him, his obsidian knife shattered under Ruth's shoe. Then Maya's phone, still recording, picked up a sound, a howl. Distant, echoing, coming from somewhere that wasn't quite here. It resonated through the parking lot, through the forest, through the bones of everyone who heard it. Not a howl of pain or rage, but something else. Satisfaction, completion, purpose fulfilled. And underneath it, barely audible, a man's voice. Not done yet. Marcus was the first to speak. "Did anyone else?" "Yes," Ruth interrupted. "We all heard it." She smiled, wiping her eyes. "Stubborn man. Stubborn then. Stubborn now. Stubborn forever, apparently." She looked at the others. "Samuel Blackwood doesn't know how to quit. 73 years of being a guardian, and you think a little thing like getting trapped in another dimension is going to stop him. He'll find a way back. He always does." The next 3 weeks were strange for everyone involved. Marcus Webb filed a report that classified the incident as a domestic disturbance with suspected drug use, because trying to explain what actually happened would have gotten him committed. Tobias Crane woke up in county lockup, charged with assault with a deadly weapon, attempted murder, and a variety of other crimes that would keep him busy in court for years. His lawyer tried to argue religious freedom and the right to practice ancestral traditions. The lawyer quit when Crane started explaining what those traditions actually involved. The judge ordered a psychiatric evaluation, and Crane was remanded to state custody for treatment. In his cell before they took him away, he kept muttering about doors and debts and how his family had been so close to ascending beyond mortal limitations. Maya Rodriguez stayed in the area, renting a room at the bed and breakfast in town while she tried to process what she'd documented. Her phone had captured everything: the shadows, the entity, Sam's transformation, the battle. But when she played the footage back, it showed only static and brief flashes of light. The audio was worse, filled with sounds that made her ears hurt and her vision blur. She spent hours trying to clean up the files, to salvage something usable, before finally accepting that some things weren't meant to be proven. She started a new video series instead, not about debunking hauntings, but about the communities that lived alongside them, the people who adapted to strangeness and made it part of their normal. Her first episode featured interviews with locals about the legend of the guardian dog of the Ozarks. The views were modest, but the comments were reverent. Danny Chen went back to high school and tried to act like a normal 17-year-old, but he couldn't quite manage it. Chemistry class seemed pointless when you'd seen reality tear open. Football practice felt absurd when you'd faced down something that could have eaten the entire team. His guidance counselor suggested college applications should focus on his interests, and Danny found himself researching folklore programs, anthropology, religious studies. He'd defended people with a tire iron against a demon. What did you do after that? What could possibly matter more? He started carrying a small piece of iron in his pocket, a nail he'd taken from the parking lot where the battle happened. He told himself it was just a reminder. On nights when he heard howling in the distance, he'd touch it and whisper, "Still here, still watching, thank you." Earl Miller kept running his store like always, but he restocked the ammunition under the counter and added a few other items his grandmother would have approved of: horseshoes over the doorways, rowan branches tucked into the corners, small mirrors positioned to reflect the parking lot from every angle. Customers noticed but didn't comment. This was the Ozarks. Everyone had their own way of dealing with things. Earl's just happened to be more visible than most. He started staying open later, keeping the lights burning bright until midnight, a beacon for anyone who might need it. When the power company complained about the increased usage, he paid the bill without argument. Some things were worth the cost. Ruth Abernathy visited the old Blackwood property, the house where Sam had lived before the mine collapse, where his great-great-great-granddaughter now lived with her parents. She knocked on the door with a plate of cookies, her standard method of introducing herself to neighbors, even though she'd lived in the area her whole life. Sarah's mother answered, a tired-looking woman in her mid-30s who worked 2 jobs to keep the mortgage paid. Ruth introduced herself as an old friend of the family, which was true in a way. She asked if she might talk to Sarah about local history for a project she was working on. Also true in a way. Sarah Blackwood appeared from upstairs, 8 years old with brown eyes that held a seriousness beyond her years. She wore a T-shirt with a cartoon wolf on it and carried a stuffed dog that looked like it had been loved nearly to death. Ruth saw Sam in the shape of her face, the set of her jaw. Genetics echoing across generations. They sat on the porch while Sarah's mother hovered protectively, and Ruth told stories. About the mine collapse, about the 37 men who died, about one man in particular who'd loved his daughter so much that not even death could make him leave her. "My mum says the ghost dog isn't real," Sarah said quietly. "She says I shouldn't tell the kids at school about it, because they laugh at me." She hugged her stuffed dog closer. "But I've seen him. At night sometimes when I look out my window, a big black dog on the ridge watching the house, and I don't feel scared. I feel safe." Ruth smiled and reached over to gently adjust Sarah's hair, tucking it behind her ear the way mothers and grandmothers do. "Your mother is trying to protect you from looking foolish. That's what parents do. But between you and me, the dog is real. His name was Samuel Blackwood. He was your great-great-great-grandfather. And he's been watching over this family for a very long time." "Was?" Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "Did something happen to him?" Ruth paused, choosing her words carefully. "He fought something very bad about 3 weeks ago. He won, but it cost him everything he had. He's not gone, but he's not here either. Not yet. He's trying to find his way back." She took Sarah's hands in hers. "I need you to do something for me, for him. Keep believing. Keep watching. And if you see him again, if that black dog shows up on the ridge or in your yard or anywhere near you, you tell him thank you. You tell him Sarah loves him. All the Sarahs across all the years. Can you do that?" Sarah nodded solemnly. "I can do that." She was quiet for a moment, then asked, "Miss Ruth? When he comes back, will he still remember me? I'm not the original Sarah. I'm like the 5th one or something." "Sweetheart," Ruth said gently, "you're all his Sarah. Every single one of you. That's how love works when it's strong enough. It doesn't divide, it multiplies. He loved the first Sarah. He loved her children. He loved their children. And now he loves you. All of it at once, all of it equally, all of it more than you can possibly imagine. So yes, when he comes back, he'll remember you. How could he ever forget?" On the ridge above the Blackwood house, something stirred. Not fully physical yet, not quite present, but getting closer. Sam existed in a state between states, slowly reconstructing himself from fragments scattered across dimensions. The entity's venom had nearly unmade him completely, and the transition through the tear had finished the job. But the curse that made him a guardian was older and stronger than any poison, and it wouldn't let him go. Not while there was still purpose. Not while there were still Sarahs to protect. He couldn't maintain form for more than seconds at a time. Most of his existence was spent in the spaces between spaces, watching his territory from angles that didn't exist in normal geometry, but occasionally, when the veil thinned, or when someone called his name, or when Sarah looked out her window at just the right moment, he could pull himself together enough to appear. A shadow in the tree line, a pair of sulphur-yellow eyes in the darkness, a black shape on the ridge that was there, and then wasn't. Each time was agony. Each time cost him progress in his reconstruction. But he did it anyway because that's what guardians do. They show up, they watch over, they protect, even when protection is just a reminder that someone is still there, still fighting to get back, still refusing to abandon their post. Ruth had been right. Stubborn then, stubborn now, stubborn forever. Samuel Blackwood didn't know how to quit. Death hadn't stopped him. Damnation hadn't stopped him. Being torn apart across dimensions wasn't going to stop him either. In the spaces between, he met others like him, guardians from other places, other times, other bargains struck with forces beyond mortal understanding. A woman made of ice who protected an Alaskan fishing village. A man wreathed in flames who guarded New Orleans against things that rose from the swamps. A child who never aged, standing eternal watch over a West Virginia hollow. They recognized him, welcomed him, shared techniques for maintaining coherence when reality itself fought your existence. They told him what he already knew. The way back was through service. Every life protected, every threat turned away, every moment of purpose strengthened the connection to the physical world. It was slow, it was painful, but it was the only path. So Sam watched. He stood guard even when standing meant existing as nothing but intention and will. He drove away the smaller threats that constantly tested the veil, shadows seeking easy prey, minor entities drawn by the weakening Crane had caused, even simple malicious spirits looking for someone to haunt. None of them got through. None of them touched his people. Maya, still researching and documenting with her new focus. Danny, growing into himself, learning that courage isn't the absence of fear, but the choice to act despite it. Marcus, Earl, Ruth, and all the others who'd stood in that parking lot and decided that some things were worth fighting for, even when fighting seemed pointless. And Sarah. Always Sarah. The center point of everything, the reason for all of it. Sam watched her grow over the following months, saw her 9th birthday party in the backyard, where he'd once taught the first Sarah to ride a bike, saw her defend other kids at school from bullies, standing up for them the way someone had once stood up for her, saw her excel at math and struggle with reading, saw her laugh with her friends and cry when her hamster died. Normal kid things, beautiful, mundane, everyday things that had been worth 73 years of damnation and would be worth 73 more if needed. 6 months after the incident at Miller's Gas and Grocery, something changed. The veil thinned again, but not because of a summoner or a breach. It was natural, cyclical, the way reality breathed and shifted with the seasons. Spring equinox, when death transformed into life, when balance tilted and anything became briefly possible. Sam felt the opportunity like a door opening. He gathered every fragment of himself, every piece he'd painstakingly reconstructed over months of patient work. He pulled it all together, focused it all on a single point, and he pushed. The transition hurt worse than dying had, worse than 73 years of carrying the curse, worse than the entity's venom or being ripped across dimensions. It hurt like being born, which in a way it was. Reality resisted him, tried to reject him, this thing that didn't quite fit in the neat categories of living or dead, physical or spiritual, damned or saved. But Sam had been not quite fitting for decades. He was comfortable with it. He embraced it. He was wrong for this world, yes, but the wrongness was what made him useful. The wrongness was the point. He manifested on the ridge above the Blackwood house at exactly 3:47 a.m. on the spring equinox, fully physical for the first time since the battle. His shoulder still bore the scars from the entity's attack, spectral wounds that would never fully heal. His form was less stable than it had been, more obviously supernatural, harder to maintain. But he was there. He was back. He howled, and the sound echoed through the Ozark valleys with joy and fury and triumph. On the ridge and in the houses and in the forest, those who knew what to listen for smiled in their sleep. Sarah woke to the sound. She ran to her window and saw him clearly, no longer just a shadow or a fleeting glimpse. The black dog, massive and burning with cold fire, his sulphur-yellow eyes looking directly at her. She pressed her hand to the glass and whispered the words Ruth had told her to say. "Thank you. Thank you for coming back. Sarah loves you, all the Sarahs. We all love you." Sam's tail wagged, once, twice, the hellhound equivalent of a smile. Then he turned and loped into the forest, because there was work to do. There was always work to do, and now he was back to do it. The Guardian had returned to his post. The Watcher had reclaimed his watch. The veil between worlds had a defender again, and he would hold that line until the stars went cold or until the last person he loved drew their final breath, whichever came first. Probably longer. Definitely longer. Because Samuel Blackwood was stubborn like that. 73 years ago he'd made a choice in crushing darkness. He'd accepted damnation to protect his daughter. That choice had echoed across decades, across generations, turning one man's love into a legacy that refused to die. The curse that made him a hellhound was supposed to be a punishment, chains forged in hell to bind him to service. But Sam had long ago stopped seeing it that way. The curse wasn't his prison. It was his purpose. It was his gift. It was his chance to keep being a father long after death should have ended that role. And now, restored and renewed, he stood guard over the latest Sarah, the newest generation of a family he would protect until the universe itself stopped making sense. Which, given what he'd seen in the spaces between worlds, might actually happen someday. But until then, the Ozarks had a guardian. Miller's Gas and Grocery had a protector, and anything that thought about crossing the veil in this particular corner of Missouri would have to go through a hellhound who'd fought his way back from dimensional exile because he loved his daughter that much. In the months and years that followed, there were other incidents, smaller than the entity, but still dangerous. Spirits that needed guidance to the other side, malevolent creatures that needed to be driven back, summoners who needed to be stopped before they could cause real damage. Sam handled them all, sometimes alone, sometimes with help from the humans who'd proven they could stand their ground when it mattered. An informal network developed. Ruth coordinated, her butcher shop becoming an unofficial headquarters. Maya documented, creating an archive of genuine supernatural phenomena that might someday save lives. Danny and others his age learned the old ways, the protections and wards that their grandparents' had known. Marcus kept the official records clean, filing reports that satisfied bureaucracy, while the real work happened in the shadows. Earl expanded his inventory, the back room of his store becoming a resource center for anyone who needed salt or iron or blessed ammunition or any of the dozen other things that helped against the darkness. And Sarah grew up knowing she was protected, knowing the family stories were real, knowing that love could be strong enough to overcome death and damnation and the fabric of reality itself. On her 16th birthday, Sarah sat on the porch of the Blackwood house, her house, and looked up at the ridge where a black shape stood silhouetted against the sunset. Her parents were inside preparing dinner. Her friends would arrive soon for a party. Normal teenage things. But she took a moment first to acknowledge the guardian who'd made those normal things possible. "Hey, great-great-great-grandpa Sam," she said quietly. "Thank you. For everything. For watching over us. For never giving up. I see you up there. I always have." On the ridge, Sam's tail wagged, and though no one else could hear it, Sarah swore she heard words in the wind. "You're welcome, sweetheart. Always and forever. All my love. All my Sarahs." Then he turned and disappeared into the forest, because sunset meant the veil would thin and there would be work to do. There was always work to do, and a guardian's job was never finished. But that was fine. Samuel Blackwood had made his choice 73 years ago, and he'd make the same choice again every single day. To stand in the gap, to protect the innocent, to turn damnation into purpose and curse into calling, to be the monster that fought worse monsters, to prove that love, real love, true love, didn't end with death or diminish with distance or fade with time. It just kept going, kept burning, kept protecting, kept watching, kept standing guard on lonely ridges under Missouri stars, while families laughed and lived and loved in the valleys below. That was the job. That was the purpose. That was what it meant to be a guardian. And in the end, standing there in the twilight between one day and the next, one world and another, one form of existence and something else entirely. Sam wouldn't have had it any other way. The howl that had frozen everyone in place 6 months ago had been a warning, a weapon, a declaration of protection, but underneath it all, it had been something simpler and more powerful. It had been love. And love, as 73 years had proven, was the strongest force in any universe, the one thing that could overcome any curse, survive any battle, and rebuild itself from fragments scattered across impossible spaces. The Guardian was home. The Watcher had returned. And the Ozarks, that strange and beautiful corner of Missouri where folklore breathed and legends walked, was a little bit safer because one man had looked at damnation and said yes if it meant his daughter would be protected. That yes had echoed across time, and it would keep echoing forever and always as long as there were Sarahs to protect and threats to stand against and love strong enough to overcome death itself. The Hellhound stood guard. The story continued. And somewhere in the spaces between worlds, the universe itself smiled, because every now and then damnation found a worthy bearer, and curses found a carrier who turned them into blessings. Samuel Blackwood was both, and the Ozarks were lucky to have him.